All right, so we're diving into Neil Strauss's The Game, a book that kind of plunges us into this world of pickup artistry. It's going to be pretty wild, huh?
Oh yeah, it's like yeah, we get this backstage pass to a world that most people only kind of hear about in whispers.
Yeah, and we've got excerpts that break down all the key steps, almost like it's a playbook for attracting
And
women.
I think that's where like all the controversy comes in, right? Like the idea that you can just boil human connection down into this formula.
And we are going to get into those ethical considerations for sure. I mean, that's a huge part of the conversation around this book, but I think beyond that, we're going to explore the psychological and social dynamics that are at play here. It's not just about the techniques themselves, right?
Yeah, it's about the motivation, the vulnerabilities, the desires that drive people to seek connection, whether it's conventional means or even through the game.
Right. And speaking of motivations, the book starts with Sprouse himself, this self-proclaimed average frustrated chant, and he embarks on this journey to transform himself into Style, this pickup artist.
It's not just like a superficial makeover. Either he like immerses himself in this whole community workshops, guru-specific methodologies. It's like a whole subculture.
Yeah, it's almost like an apprenticeship, learning from all these seasoned pickup artists who each have their own philosophies and approaches.
Yeah, you could think about it like different schools of thought. You've got guys like Mystery, known for his flamboyant peacocking, using all these attention-grabbing tactics.
Okay, so peacocking is about showcasing yourself being the center of attention. But what about those more subtle techniques, like using negs?
Ah, negs, yeah, those backhanded compliments designed to kind of undermine confidence and make someone more receptive to your advances. It's a psychological tactic that you could say preys on insecurities.
Definitely feels manipulative, almost like a power play. I mean, do you think it actually works?
I mean, that's the whole debate, right? Some people argue that it creates like intrigue or challenge, while others see it as just plain disrespect.
Yeah, and that's a question that I think we're going to keep coming back to, the effectiveness versus the ethics of these techniques. But for now, let's get into the steps themselves. The book outlines 11 in total. So if you were like trying to apply this to your own life, where would you begin?
Well, it all starts with approaching an opening, which sounds simple enough, but Strauss emphasizes that you have to unlearn old habits and adopt these new routines.
It's like you're reprogramming your social autopilot, right? Instead of shying away from interaction, you're like actively seeking it out.
Exactly. And that leads right into the next step, demonstrating value. And think about bragging or anything, but showcasing your skills, your personality, anything that makes you stand out.
So it's about confidence, but also about substance. You can't just like walk up and be like, hey, I'm awesome, let's date. You have to actually back it up.
Yeah, you have to embody that value, not just talk about it. And that's where things start to get interesting because it's not just about surface level attraction. It's about tapping into those deeper psychological triggers.
Okay, so what happens after you've approached someone, demonstrated your value? What's the next move in this, intricate dance of attraction?
Well, this is where things get a little bit more strategic. The next step is isolating the target, separating the person that you're interested in from their group.
Ah, so now we're getting into like the tactics. It feels a little calculated, doesn't it?
It does, and that's where I think the ethical considerations come in. Is it genuine interest, or is it a calculated maneuver to gain an advantage?
Yeah, it's almost like you're trying to create an artificial sense of intimacy by removing them from their support system.
And that's one of the criticisms that a lot of people have leveled at the game, that it can feel manipulative, almost like you're playing a game with someone's emotions.
Right, but let's say you've successfully isolated the target. Now, what happens next?
Well, then you move on to creating an emotional connection. But here's the thing, Strauss starts to emphasize a shift from pure manipulation to, genuine connection. He talks about finding common ground, shared interests, building rapport beyond just the physical attraction.
So it's not just about getting someone into bed, it's about like actually forming a bond. But I mean, how genuine can that bond be if it's built on a foundation of calculated tactics?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something that Strauss himself grapples with throughout the book. He's not just blindly presenting these techniques, he's actually questioning them, exploring the ethical gray areas.
It's like he's walking a tightrope between strategy and authenticity, trying to figure out where the line is.
Exactly, and that internal conflict is what makes the book so compelling. He's not just a guru spouting techniques. He's a flawed human being trying to figure things out just like the rest of us.
So we've got approaching, demonstrating value, isolating, creating connection. It's like the carefully choreographed dance. What comes next?
Well, if things are progressing, well, the next step is extracting to a seduction location, basically, moving beyond the initial meeting place to a more intimate setting.
So you're talking about creating an environment that's conducive to romance, right? Like inviting someone back to your amazingly decorated apartment, that's full of interesting conversation starters.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. The key is to shift to a location that feels more private, more personal.
And I'm guessing pumping buying temperature comes next, and that sounds like a very specific term. Can you explain what that means?
So imagine turning up the heat, but like in a subtle way. You're building anticipation, creating a sense of excitement and desire.
Okay, so you're stoking the flames, so to speak. And finally, we arrive at making a physical connection, which I assume is the ultimate goal for most people using these techniques.
You're not wrong. Physical intimacy is definitely presented as like the key objective. And this is where the ethical considerations become even more pronounced because if you've orchestrated this entire encounter, you know how much of the other person's consent is truly informed.
Yeah, it raises the question of agency, doesn't it? If someone's unaware of the game being played, are they really making a free choice?
Exactly. And that's a question that lingers throughout the book.
But before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, the book also delves into different philosophies within the pickup artist community, right? It's not just one monolithic approach.
Oh, absolutely. There are different gurus with their own unique spins on the game. You got guys like Ross Jeffries with his speed seduction method, focused on using hypnotic language patterns. And then there's David D'Angelo, who emphasizes becoming like the ideal man, confident, assertive, in control.
It's almost like becoming a method actor, right? Taking on a new persona to attract someone. But that begs the question, at what point does playing a wall become inauthentic or even harmful?
That's the ethical dilemma at the heart of the game. Can you truly separate technique from intention? And even if you can, is it fair to manipulate someone's emotions, even if it's in the pursuit of connection?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. And speaking of manipulation and ethics, one of the most controversial figures in the book is Tom Cruise. He actually makes an appearance.
Yeah, Strauss recounts meeting Cruise and discussing his views on seduction techniques. It's a fascinating glimpse into how even celebrities can be drawn to this world. What was your take on that? Did you expect that kind of cameo in a book about pickup artistry?
To be honest, it was pretty surprising. You don't typically associate Tom Cruise with that kind of subculture, but it does make you wonder how widespread are these ideas and, how much influence do they have on our perceptions of dating and relationships?
It's a question worth exploring because even if you've never read the game, you've probably encountered some of these ideas in pop culture, movies, TV shows, even in everyday conversations. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's bring it back to Strauss and his journey. He goes from learning these individual techniques to creating like a whole community, a lifestyle centered around the game, right?
Right. Project Hollywood. What can you tell us about that?
Project Hollywood was this grand experiment, a shared living space where all these pickup artists, including Strauss and Mystery, could like fully immerse themselves in the game, turning it from this like hobby into a lifestyle.
So they're like living and breathing this stuff 24/7. That sounds intense.
They had a dedicated space for practicing techniques, analyzing their interactions, even like filming their encounters to review and refine their approaches.
It's like they created their own laboratory for studying human attraction, with themselves as like the test subjects. But wasn't it also about more than just like picking up women? They were trying to like build this whole social scene, right?
Exactly. They weren't just looking for one-night stands or anything like that. They were aiming to like infiltrate Hollywood circles, to network with celebrities, to become part of that exclusive world.
And did they succeed? Did they actually like rub shoulders with the A-listers?
Oh, absolutely. They had this secret weapon, this guy named Papa, who was this incredible connector. He just had this knack for bringing people together, for opening doors that seemed impossible to breach.
So Papa was like the key to their success. He kind of helped them navigate that whole social landscape of Hollywood.
Oh, he was instrumental. He even orchestrated an encounter with Paris Hilton, which became like this legendary event within the community.
Wow, Paris Hilton, that's a whole other level of game at that point. It sounds like Project Hollywood was a success, at least, on the surface. But what about the deeper implications? Were they actually able to form like genuine connections in this environment where everybody's focused on playing the game?
That's the question that starts to like unravel the whole experiment you see, because when relationships enter the picture, things get complicated.
Yeah, because if your goal is to constantly be attracting new women, how can you sustain like a committed relationship? It just seems like those two objectives are fundamentally at odds.
Precisely. And that tension comes to a head with the arrival of this woman named Katya. She completely disrupts the dynamics of Project Hollywood.
So we have this whole community of men focused on attracting women, and then this one woman walks in and just throws everything into chaos. That's a pretty fascinating twist.
It is, and what makes it even more interesting is that Katya initially connects with Mystery, who, up to this point has been presented as this like confident, almost untouchable figure.
But if he's so good at playing the game, why does he get caught up in this relationship? Shouldn't he be immune to those kind of emotional entanglements?
Well, because even the most skilled pickup artists are still human. They have emotions vulnerabilities, and Katya just triggers those in Mystery.
It's like a reminder that no one is above those basic human needs for connection and intimacy, no matter how hard they try to control or manipulate those desires.
Exactly. And as Mystery's feelings for Katya deepen, it creates all this tension and conflict within Project Hollywood.
I can imagine it's like this microcosm of the larger societal debate about masculinity relationships and that whole tension between freedom and commitment.
It's a powerful metaphor, isn't it? And it all culminates in this pretty dramatic fallout. Mystery's emotional struggles, his relationship with Katya, it all implodes and leads to a major shift in the dynamics of Project Hollywood.
So the experiment ultimately fails, or does it transform into something else entirely?
It definitely undergoes a major transformation, and for Strauss it leads to this period of introspection. He starts to question, the morality of his actions, the authenticity of his relationships.
So he's realizing that the game, while effective for attracting women, doesn't necessarily lead to fulfilling relationships. It's like he's achieved success on one level, but he's still searching for something deeper.
Precisely, he's starting to see the limitations of these techniques, the emotional toll they can take both on himself and on the women he's interacting with.
So what happens next? Does he just abandon the game altogether, or does he try to find a way to reconcile it with his newfound desire for genuine connection?
It's not a complete 180, it's more of like a gradual shift in perspective. He still uses some of the techniques, but he starts focusing more on genuine connection, on being himself rather than a persona.
That makes sense. It's like he's learned the rules of the game, but now he's choosing to play by his own set of values. But is that even possible? Can you really separate those techniques from the underlying intention?
That's the central question that Strauss grapples with. And ultimately, it's a question that each individual has to answer for themselves. There's no easy answer, no right or wrong path.
So what would you say is the most valuable insight you've gained from diving deep into the game? If you were to distill it down to one key takeaway, what would it be?
For me, it's the recognition that while techniques can be helpful, they're just tools. The real key to attraction lies in who you are at your core, your values, your personality, your genuine self.
So it's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming the best version of yourself. That's a powerful message, and it applies to so much more than just dating.
Absolutely. It's about self-awareness, about understanding your strengths and weaknesses, about being authentic and vulnerable. And those are qualities that are attractive in any context, whether you're looking for love, pursuing a career, or simply trying to live a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, it's like the game is a doorway into this larger conversation about human connection, about the complexities of attraction, about the search for meaning and purpose in our relationships.
Beautifully said, it's a journey that can lead to self-discovery, even if it takes you down some unexpected paths.
Speaking of unexpected paths, the book also delves into some pretty controversial topics, like the use of manipulation and the objectification of women. Did you find those aspects of the book difficult to grapple with?
They're definitely challenging, and I think it's important to approach them with a critical eye. But I think it's also important to remember that Strauss isn't endorsing these behaviors. He's presenting them as part of this larger social phenomenon, the subculture that exists, whether we like it or not.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to society, showing us the dark underbelly of the dating world, even if it's uncomfortable to look at.
Exactly. And by doing so, he's forcing us to confront some difficult questions about, gender dynamics, power imbalances, and the ways in which we relate to each other.
Yeah, it's not just a light read. It's a book that makes you think, question your own assumptions, and maybe even reevaluate your own experiences in the dating world.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so compelling, even all these years later.
So we've talked about the techniques, the community, the ethical dilemmas, but what about Strauss's own journey? Where does he end up after all of this? Does he actually find what he's looking for?
Well, the book concludes with him stepping back from the intensity of Project Hollywood, and he starts focusing on developing a more genuine relationship with Lisa, a woman he connects with on a deeper level.
So he finds a balance between the game and authentic connection. It's like he's integrated what he's learned into a more holistic approach to relationship.
That's the implication. He doesn't completely reject the techniques, but he uses them more selectively, more thoughtfully.
It's like he's learned the language of attraction, but now he's using it to write his own story, one that's more aligned with his values and his desire for genuine connection.
I love that analogy. It perfectly captures the essence of his transformation. He's taken the tools that he's acquired and forged his own path.
And that's a pretty powerful message, isn't it? It's not about following somebody else's playbook. It's about defining what success means to you, both in relationships and in life.
Absolutely. It's about finding your own voice, your own way of connecting with the world.
It's like he's gone on this wild adventure, learned a lot, and now he's applying those lessons to build a more meaningful life.
That's a great way to put it. It's a journey that I think a lot of people can relate to, even if they've never stepped foot in the world of pickup artistry.
Yeah, because ultimately we're all searching for connection, for love, for that sense of belonging.
And the game, despite its controversial aspects, offers this fascinating glimpse into that universal human desire.
It makes you wonder, has Strauss ultimately changed the game of dating, or has he just exposed the rules that were already in play?
That's a great question, and one that we could probably debate for hours, but I think it's safe to say that the game has made us more aware of the dynamics at play in attraction, both the conscious and the unconscious.
It's like he's given us a peek behind the curtain, show us the mechanics of how attraction works, even if some of those mechanics are ethically questionable.
Precisely. And that knowledge in and of itself can be empowering. Whether you choose to use it for good or for ill, that's up to you.
It's like any tool, right? It can be used constructively or destructively.
Exactly. And that's where personal responsibility comes in, We have a choice in how we use the knowledge we gain, how we approach relationships, how we treat each other.
So thinking about everything we've discussed, what do you think is like the biggest misconception about the game? What do people get wrong about it?
I think the biggest misconception is that it's just about tricks and manipulation. While the book does present those elements, it also delves into these deeper themes of self-improvement, emotional intelligence, and the complexities of human connection.
Yeah, it's more than just a pickup manual. It's like social commentary, a psychological exploration, and a personal journey all rolled into one.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes it so enduring. It speaks to something fundamental about the human experience, that desire to connect, to be loved, to find our place in the world.
And it does so in a way that's both entertaining and thought-provoking. It's a book that stays with you long after you've finished reading it.
Absolutely, and it continues to generate conversation, even today.
And speaking of conversation, I think we've had a pretty good one ourselves.
I've enjoyed it. It's always fascinating to revisit the game and explore all of its nuances.
So we've covered a lot of ground, but before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add? Any final thoughts for our listener? Okay, so we've gone pretty deep into this world of the game, exploring all the techniques, the community, the ethical questions. What does it all mean for our listener, out there navigating the complexities of attraction and relationships?
Well, I think the game offers like this valuable, albeit controversial, glimpse into the dynamics of human connection. It challenges us to think critically about the strategies we use, the motivations behind them, and the impact they have on ourselves and others.
Yeah, it definitely pushing some buttons, but I think that's part of what makes it such a fascinating deep dive. It forces us to confront these kind of uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the ways in which we seek validation and connection.
Absolutely, and it raises this fundamental question that I'd love to get your take on. Can techniques designed for manipulation ever lead to genuine connection?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's almost like you're trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. Can something authentic and lasting emerge from something that started with, deception or manipulation?
I think it depends on the individual and the evolution of their intentions. If someone uses these techniques initially, but then shifts their focus towards genuine connection, vulnerability, mutual respect, perhaps something deal can blossom. What do you think?
It's tough to say. I think there's always that risk that those initial patterns of manipulation will kind of resurface, even if it's unintentional. But maybe the awareness that you gain through the game, the understanding of those underlying dynamics, that can be a catalyst for positive change.
That's a very hopeful perspective, and it highlights the importance of, self-awareness and critical thinking. The games can be a dangerous tool in the wrong hands, but it can also be a powerful tool for personal growth and understanding.
So it ultimately comes down to choice, doesn't it? The choice to use this knowledge for good or for ill, the choice to prioritize authenticity over manipulation, the choice to build relationships that are based on mutual respect and genuine connection.
Exactly, and I think that's a powerful takeaway from this whole deep dive. The game doesn't offer, these easy answers or a guaranteed path to success. It just illuminates the playing field, and it gives us a glimpse into that complex and often contradictory nature of human attraction.
Yeah, and it leaves us with some important questions to ponder. What are our own motivations in relationships? Are we seeking genuine connection, or are we just seeking, validation and ego boost? Are we playing by our own authentic rules, or are we playing by someone else's playbook?
Those are questions definitely worth reflecting on, because ultimately, The most fulfilling relationships are those that are built on a foundation of honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the game. Hopefully, this exploration has been insightful and thought-provoking for our listener out there.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those genuine connections that make life truly meaningful.